This video is on factoring perfect square trinomials. A perfect square trinomial is a trinomial that can be factored into a binomial squared. That's why it's called a perfect square trinomial. So just as 9 is a perfect square that can be factored into 3 times 3, so 9 is equal to 3 squared, or 16x squared is a perfect square that can be factored into 4x times 4x, so 16x squared is the quantity 4x squared. So too is the trinomial x squared plus 6x plus 9 a perfect square that can be factored into x plus 3 times x plus 3. So x squared plus 6x plus 9 is equal to the quantity x plus 3 squared. So if you don't believe me, let's work backwards and multiply. So the quantity x plus 3 squared is equal to x plus 3 times x plus 3. Distributing, I get x squared, x times 3, which is 3x, 3 times x, which is 3x, and then 3 times 3, which is 9. And combining like terms, I get x squared plus 6x plus 9, which is my perfect square trinomial. So if you take a look at this, in this trinomial, x squared plus 6x plus 9, notice that my middle term, my b, which is 6, is 2 times 3, and my c, which is 9, is actually 3 squared. The common number there is 3. This term is 2 times 3. This term is 3 squared. Let's take a look at another one. Here we have x squared minus 10x plus 25. Notice that I have a minus in the middle there. My b term is negative, and that's equal to the quantity x minus 5 squared. Because if I were to multiply x minus 5 times x minus 5, I do indeed get x squared minus 10x plus 25. Notice again that my middle term, my b, is equal to 2 times negative 5, and c is equal to, my 25 is equal to negative 5 squared. The common number there is, actually I should have written there, instead of 5, I should have written the number negative 5. So we can see that each of these can be factored into a binomial squared, but now the tricky part is, how do you figure out what that binomial is? So here's a couple guidelines. The first term in the binomial, so in this case this x, is going to be the square root of ax squared. Recall that when we write a trinomial, ax squared plus bx plus c, this is the form that all of them have been in. So I'm going to take the square root of this, and that's going to give me the first term in my binomial, so in this case x. The second term in the binomial is the number, this is a little tricky, the number that times 2 times the square root of a is equal to b, and the same number squared gives me c. Let's take a look at some examples and see how this is going to work out. So here we have a couple perfect square trinomials we need to factor. So the first one is x squared minus 18x plus 81. So notice that ax squared, in this case, is equal to x squared. So when I take the square root of that, the square root of x squared, or if you wanted you could put a 1 there, okay, I get just x. So the first term in my trinomial, or my binomial squared is going to be x. My second term is going to be 2 times the square root of a times some number, and that has to equal my b term. So 2 times the square root of a times something is going to give me a negative 18, and that same number that I'm looking for squared is going to give me 81. Okay, and that's going to be the number that's the second term in my trinomial here. So when I think of the, what number squared gives me 81, the first thing that pops into my mind is 9. So 9 times 9 is 81. So is 2 times, I didn't simplify, what's the square root of a? In this case, a was equal to 1, so the square root of a is just 1. That's pretty straightforward. But 2 times a is not, or 2 times 9 is not negative 18. I need a negative 9, and I do know that negative 9 squared is 81. So this is going to factor into x minus 9 squared. Let's try our next one. This one gets a little more complicated because you'll notice that this is 9x squared plus 42x plus 49. So ax squared in this case is equal to 9x squared. So the first term that's going to go in my binomial is going to be the square root of that. And the square root of 9x squared is 3x. So my first term in here is going to be 3x. Now I'm looking for a number that's 2 times the square root of 9, and then times some number is equal to my middle term of 42, and then that same number squared is going to give me 49. I actually like to work backwards. I know that the number squared that gives me 49 is going to be 7, and let's see if that works in here. So is 2 times the square root of 9, which is 3, times 7, is that equal to 42? It is, because 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 7 is 42. So that means that my number that goes in here is going to be a positive 7. So this trinomial factors into the quantity 3x plus 7 squared. And my last example here, so I'm looking at ax squared, and that's equal to 20x squared. Now if I tried to take the square root of that, which I'm going to need, 20 is not a perfect square, so that's not going to work. So I need to go back and look again at my trinomial. One thing that I notice is that 20 and negative 60 and 45 all have the greatest common factor of 5. So I'm going to take a 5 out, factor 5 out of each term. And now, whoops, sorry, I multiplied that wrong. And now I have a perfect square trinomial, or at least I think it's going to work. So let's give that a try. So this is going to be ax squared is now equal to 4x squared. Let's take the square root of that, and that gives me 2x. So the first term in my trinomial is going to be 2x. Don't forget to bring down that 5 that we, the greatest common factor of 5 that we factored out. Now I'm looking for 2 times this number here, which is the square root of a, times some number that's going to give me my middle term, my b, negative 12. And then that same number that I'm looking for squared is going to give me a 9. Well, the first thing I think of is 3, because 3 squared is 9. But it's got to be the same number here. That's not going to give me 2 times 2 times 3 is not going to give me a negative 12. So it needs to be a negative 3. So negative 3 is the second term in my binomial. So 20x squared minus 60x plus 45 factors into 5 times the quantity 2x minus 3 squared. So in this video we took a look at how to factor perfect square trinomials. It's a little complicated, but with a lot of practice I think you can start to see the pattern and see that a perfect square trinomial will factor into a binomial squared.